For Most Haunted Place in America, Sightings nominates the historic mining town of Georgetown, Colorado. In our ongoing investigation there, historical research is backing up the psychic impressions of paranormal investigator Peter James. When a Sightings team last visited historic Georgetown, Colorado, psychic investigator Peter James encountered an entity he called Edward, here in the attic of Bill Pentland and Becky Richardson's Full Circle Cafe.
Edward, that's your name, Edward?
Bill and Becky were sure that Peter had made contact with the former proprietor of their establishment, a man named Edward Shower. But that wasn't the last name Peter was getting.
And I'm Edward B, is all I get so far. His last name has 2 syllables, boom, boom. And it sounds like ridge or bridge or idge.
It seemed that Peter was on the wrong track. Then, a historical researcher provided Sightings with a 130-year-old newspaper account from Georgetown that indicated that there was more than one Edward associated with the Full Circle Cafe. In addition to Shower, there was a notorious, hot-headed prospector who frequented the place, a man whose name had an eerie ring, Edward Bainbridge.
There's a John M, letter M, that I get that apparently was perhaps a friend of his or some place where he went frequently with John or he hung out with John. He's asking me for some fish. Fish? A can?
On April 24th, 1867, Edward Bainbridge sat down at John Mickle's saloon for a game of poker. The stakes? A can of smoked oysters.
What he's saying essentially is that he was accused of something that he didn't do, and there was a man whose name was Jim or James, and he said James was an SOB, and he made me angry.
Edward Bainbridge lost the poker game to a man named James Martin. Bainbridge was outraged and shot Martin in the head.
But there's something around his neck, and he also talks about being around some rocks. I don't know what that means, but he's around some rocks.
An angry crowd of Georgetown vigilantes apprehended Bainbridge and took him to a spot called the Point of Rocks, where he was hanged by the neck.
And he said, I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him, and he's angry. Don't be angry at me.
Amazingly, James Martin, the man presumed to have been murdered by Edward Bainbridge, survived the shooting.
Doc has my body, and he put it on display, and he's calling him an SOB. This is a volatile entity, by the way.
As a final injustice, Bainbridge's body was dug up and sold to a doctor in nearby Central City, where his skeleton was kept on display.
What I get is the reason why he's here is because he wants us to know that he was accused of something that either didn't happen or he didn't do it. And until that's made public, he's not going to rest.
Peter James claims that he had no knowledge of local history before his trip to Georgetown. And yet, it was with uncanny accuracy that he also identified several historical figures haunting this Georgetown establishment.
A lot of strange things would happen at the market. The mining, the hardships.
And there was nobody there. I go in the kitchen.
A lot of them are still here, and, you know, they're supposedly still protecting their gold and stuff.
The miners, for the most part, did their work up in the hills, and then on weekends they'd come down to town, and Georgetown typically had its fair share of saloons. It had a red light district, discreetly zoned on the other side of the creek.
I'm sure it was discreet, but we had a lot of politicians even come up here. I think this was kept quite quiet from Georgetown. Many of the politicians would leave their wives at home and come up here to do business.
Sheila Carbone is restoring this historic turn-of-the-century house on Brownell Street, once part of Georgetown's infamous red light district. And according to Sheila, there's at least one former tenant here who just can't seem to move on.
I was just aware that I was not alone in the house, that there was someone else in the house with me and my family.
Sheila feels that it was her family's restoration work that brought out the supernatural forces, and they were angry.
I was at the kitchen sink, and I have 2 shelves in a window in the kitchen with 3 brackets on each side. These are not shelves that could just fall down. And they came flying out into the kitchen and broke on the kitchen floor.
After some historical research, Sheila uncovered a dark secret haunting this house. The tragic story of a teenage prostitute who had committed suicide after much heartache and despair.
I believe that the ghost is in the bedroom that I have not finished yet. I'm redoing the house, and that bedroom I just keep putting off. It's like that's her territory. I'm almost invading her privacy over there. I would say that she's very young. I believe that she was pregnant, and that she was in love with someone. I believe that she worked this house as probably one of the ladies of the evening, and she became pregnant by a young miner, and he was killed in some kind of a mining accident.
The details of the haunting here, the flying shelves, mysterious footsteps, are not common knowledge in Georgetown. So when Peter James entered this paranormally charged environment, he could not have known these facts, nor the history of the teenage prostitute, nor the mining accident. And yet his accuracy was stunning.
This room has quite a history. I feel like she looked out this window a lot looking for the love of her life and other gentlemen that she entertained. She tells me that her name was Maggie, Margaret, Maggie, and that she was a lady of the night, and she fell in love with a man whose name begins with a J or G. I think it's John. And I believe that he died in a mining accident or where a mine collapsed. And I do believe that she was pregnant. And she could not handle the fact that she was left alone with the oncoming birth, that she committed suicide in this very room. And she died tragically. So the bottom line, there's a very tragic, romantic link to this house, and she keeps expecting John to come back, but he's not coming back. So she went with him.
In my opinion, Georgetown happens to be a very highly concentrated area of hauntings. I think the entire town is haunted. So the activity here is probably no different or no greater than perhaps the building next door. The only difference is that the entity here is probably a little more demonstrative or more violent than most of the ghosts in this town.
Living and working in a haunted house, in a haunted town, is no obstacle for Sheila Carbone or the hundreds of other Georgetown residents who relish their unique place in the time-space continuum that seems to exist here.
I have a unique location in Georgetown, so it's a lovely house to be in. I like it very much. I think I'm never alone here. I have lots of company.
Despite a series of frightening encounters, Sheila says that she's very happy in her Georgetown home and has come to feel privileged that she's the go-between in a paranormal love affair.